All right, well, welcome everybody. We're at the top of the hour, so I imagine a few more attendees will come in as we get started, but wanted to start in the interest of time. I'm Mark Vanderzijl. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Associate Director of Startup Advancement at Johns Hopkins Tech Ventures and have the pleasure of working with the rest of our panelists here in various forms. But this is the first of a four-part session or panel series that was envisioned by one of our mentors in residence, Dan Roach. His thought was if we got startup founders to share their own personal stories, it could be helpful to other companies to avoid some pitfalls, to learn some best practices, and to know exactly what it takes to launch a company and to be a startup CEO or founder. So my hope is that rather than hearing from me, I'm just the facilitator here so you can hear from the rest of our panelists here. So I'd like to introduce Doug Falk first. Co-founder, CEO of Vita Therapeutics. Sorry, I'm going in alphabetical order. And I know as a Vanderzijl, that's frustrating, Kristen, so sorry, end of the alphabet. But next up, Rick Hughen, CEO of Linshom. Rick's also a mentor in residence at JHTV, so he'll be able to speak from a few different perspectives. And Kristen Valdes, founder and CEO of b.well Connected Health. Thank you guys all for joining. I thought it might be nice, I wanted to introduce you, but let you all give your own sort of elevator pitch, if you will, to explain your company, where you are. It's up to you if you want to say like how long ago it was founded or how many employees you have. That's totally up to you. But let's maybe flip the order and start with ladies first and go with Kristen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. So b.well is 7 years young. I have been a healthcare executive for the last 2.5 decades, so had a very good career in healthcare before launching my startup. My startup was founded simply as a result of why many healthcare startups are founded, which was a personal story. I had a child with a very significant autoimmune condition, and here I was, this healthcare industry expert, being an EVP at United Healthcare and having worked at CMS before that, and I could not navigate the healthcare delivery system on her behalf to get her the care she needed, the diagnosis that she needed timely, and quite frankly, just to get her condition under control. And then she had a near fatal incident because 2 EMR systems couldn't communicate with one another. And it was at that point that I just said, healthcare is too damn hard. And so I launched b.well to simplify healthcare for everyone. And it is a digital transformation platform. We work with employers, payers, health systems, and retail pharmacies to provide a reimagined consumer experience to individuals and their families that start with giving them access and transparency to all their health information in one location, or later in interoperability, but then using that data to create truly personalized experiences and frictionless experiences as we help them to navigate into the care delivery system using a combination of in-person, virtual, and digital care. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. I really appreciate you guys taking the time today. I should have thanked you all first, and everyone who's joining us on the lunch hour, if you're in the East Coast or wherever you're zooming in from. I appreciate you all being here. Rick, how about you next? Talk about Linshom for us.
Sure. Linshom, which is Hebrew for to breathe, was founded after an anesthesiologist had a patient, a child, suffer irreversible brain damage on the trip between the emergency room and radiology. And the child stopped breathing. It was not detected because there are huge amounts of time in the hospital where respiratory monitoring does not occur. And it was a totally avoidable event. So that kicked into motion a collaboration among 2 anesthesiologists, electrical engineer, a computer science engineer, and a PhD physicist to basically build a small, lightweight, portable respiratory monitor that could track respiration 24/7 at the patient's bedside, or in our case, also in the patient's living room. So that's what Linshom does. We deliver an operating room quality respiratory profile that includes tidal volume, which is the amount of air you move with each breath. So we're the only device on the planet that delivers tidal volume outside of the operating room. So that full profile is what we're launching to the patient bedside and the patient home to monitor respiration and avoid these catastrophic events that kill some people and create huge morbidity and avoid ICU transfers and these terrible crash and burn rescue scenarios.
Thanks, Rick. And last but not least, Doug, how about Vita Therapeutics?
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you hosting all of us. So I'll keep it fairly short to not go super in the weeds of the science of what we're working on. But we started Vita about 2.5 years ago out of Hopkins. My background had been on the investment side of the biotech world. And I really wanted to get a little bit more involved in some companies on the really cutting edge of cell engineering. So what Vita focuses on is really combining gene editing technology with traditional cell therapy, all with the hopes of replacing defective cells in patients with functional cells. So taking it one step deeper, we really work with two core technologies. The first is a cell therapy that we're developing for really patients suffering from multiple different degenerative muscle conditions. We really believe that we have a technology that can actually repair and replace human muscle in patients. And we're hoping to bring that to the clinic later next year. And then our second technology, which is fairly new, is actually immunotherapy. It's a technology that also came out of Hopkins that we think, and thus far, have been able to generate really good preclinical data, but think that this is going to be a treatment for multiple different solid tumors. So right now, we're really in the Series A stage, in the preclinical stage, but the goal is to have both of those treatments filing an IND, which means we're allowed to move into human clinical trials next year.
Great. Thank you, guys. I think it's obviously you're very well polished on your elevator pitches. Not the first time you've done that, but it gives like a nice introduction to let people know what technology area you're working in, how long you've been at it. And what we've tried to do over these 4 different panels is to have a diverse background of founders and technology areas. You three today all are at least in the healthcare space, but we've got therapeutics, medical device, and digital today represented. And you guys can correct me or elaborate if you feel like I bucketed you in the wrong vertical, but I wanted to explain sort of the different paths to market and the foundation for different types of companies. So we've got a different background each session, and I should let everyone know there will be another session coming up in April, and then 2 more later this spring and early summer. So what I'm curious first, if you guys can share your experience, what compelled you to be a startup founder, especially if you left the security of another profession? So maybe we'll start with Rick.
So I started in the startup world long ago. This is my 3rd startup. Prior to this, we launched CSA Medical with a license of some technology out of the Navy, and that was sold to Steris in 2019. And prior to that, I joined a startup called Learnware, which was a license of some technology out of Hopkins that was built up to about $10 million in revenue and sold off to a private equity firm. So at the time, I had moved from Johnson & Johnson. So you don't get much bigger and more secure than that. And really what drove it was impact, really just pure impact, in a giant machine like J&J and Medtronic and BD, all of whom I've worked with are fantastic companies. But I was just unable to see the effect of what I was doing, and thought that startup would change that. So I dove in basically and joined a startup, cold turkey, and never looked back. It's just I can't imagine doing anything else at this point. So it's not for everybody. It's really, really hard. It can be financially very painful at times. It can be financially very rewarding at times. But you need to like roller coasters in a big way. And if that is fun, then it's for you. If it's not, then it's not for you. And neither of those answers is right or wrong. It's just what's good for you.
I think,
Thanks,
in my
Rick.
case, it was a little different in my case. I felt compelled that someone had to solve this problem. And I knew that I had the know-how to go about and do it. Now, obviously, there's a lot of scary things and there's a lot of unknowns, but after having a, over 2 decades long career, I kind of thought to myself, I can always get another job. But at the same time, I think Richard's comments are very important. You need to have the financial and the emotional fortitude to see this all the way through. I tell people all the time when they're thinking about jumping out and being a founder, I'm like, can you afford to be salary free for 4 to 5 years? Because sometimes that's what it takes. Ideally, it's not what it takes. But the reality is that, sometimes it does, because those early days are very hard, especially in healthcare. Sales cycle timelines are very long. But there are, the roller coasters there are very high highs and there are very low lows. And you have to be able to have a support network around you that can keep you moving. You have to really believe in the thing that you are trying to solve for. And a lot of times, even when you're raising capital, if you go that route, capital investors will say, like, they want to know why you are the person to solve the problem. And it's not so much that you have the know-how, it's that you are going to be relentless in your pursuit of solving the problem, because inevitably your business models are going to change, how you pitch is going to change, who your partners are, and even who your team around you, can change. So making sure that you really fully want to commit to this problem. If it's something that you think is interesting, but you don't really care about from a passion perspective, it's going to be even harder. And so I think, many folks that are entrepreneurs and founders feel like they know enough about their subject matter expert that they can go out and get a job if it fails. But you have to be really true to yourself at the beginning of, are you a personality type that can mentally afford to fail? Can you handle that? And I think that that's a realization that I don't know any startup entrepreneur or founder that hasn't had to look at themselves in the mirror and say, it has to be okay if this doesn't work. It doesn't mean that necessarily I was the wrong person or the company was the wrong thing, or even that the product wasn't valuable. Sometimes it's that the timing in the market is wrong. Sometimes there's things beyond your circumstances in your control. But the reality is that you have to be okay with failure. And you have to be strong enough to make sure you have the support around you to get through the lower lows, so that you can really celebrate the big wins.
I love that you both mentioned the roller coaster effect. I always tell people, there's moments where you feel like you're on top of the world, and then just a second later, you can be brought back down to reality. And it's just a constant fluctuation of just being on top and, feeling, down at the bottom. So I love that you both said it, because I'm always sitting there kind of in that same perspective. But I agree with a lot with what Kristen's saying, is that there's got to be that mission. There's got to be that passion behind the drive to actually want to start your own company, right? So I think for me, I always had this personal kind of desire to kind of get my hands on something and kind of build from the ground up. But what really sparked me to build a company like Vita was kind of almost this mission per se. So, I said my background, I was on the investment side of the biotech world. And I remember seeing this problem that existed on the investor front, right? So these are the people who basically, have all the funds that dictate the innovation of the therapeutics world, right? And I saw this trend where there were so many investors who, they have their own metrics that they got to hit, their own investors that they got to satisfy. But there's so many investors who just wanted to invest in something traditional, something safe. And at the end of the day, I always felt like 90+% of all therapeutics being invested in, at best, can only mitigate symptoms. And I really wanted to help bring some of these newer technologies to market that could, at the end of the day, actually replace defective cells in patients, actually bring these patients back to this next one step, this next, restorative step. So I think you have to have that passion. And, I always find times where, it's super frustrating, right? And I always say to myself, like, how do I get this done? And it's a constant reminder that no one's really ever done anything, similar to what a company like Vita is doing. And I always try to, find myself going back to that mission, that reason for like why I left the stability and then wanted to, enter this world of crazy startup life. So I think it's really important to kind of have that passion and have that mission with you at all times.
Thank you, guys. So Kristen in particular mentioned sort of the ability to work without a salary potentially for a little while. Is there any inherent catch-22 to launching a business that to hire people, you may or may not need money, but to raise money, you may have to have started a company and started raising capital unless you have your own or friends, family, and others who can help you get started. So how do you sort of navigate that? Like, when does go from a concept or an idea to we're actually doing this?
Yeah, I tell people all the time, there is such a horrid cycle at the very beginning, because in order to get capital to build a product, you have to have traction. In order to have traction, you have to have a product. And in order to have a product, you have to have capital and a team. So there literally is no easy entry point. And so most folks spend, rightfully so, because they see a problem, they see a solution, and they spend all of their time creating this product. And it's why, and I see Brian Stansky on the call, and he'll smile lovingly at me for learning this lesson very early days, which is it's why most entrepreneurs are really terrible in their beginning stages at pitching their business for capital. Is because all they talk about is the solution and convincing people of the problem. When in fact, what investors really want to know is, do you have a business that's going to grow and make money? And they actually put a little bit less weight on the solution and the problem. They're assuming, that if they know the space, that's a given. They'll see the problem statement right out of the gate. You don't have to convince them. So a lot of times it's about how do you, and we say friends and family, because you either are, kind of moonlighting, building your product, and early days leveraging things like equity to get, top engineers and others to moonlight with you to build out that product, but also to make sure that you can get really strong advisors around you and make sure that you're finding the investors that bet on the team, especially if that product is not there yet. Or building the product and then going out and pitching it. The team is still really important in those early days, but you're in a vicious cycle. And so I always tell entrepreneurs that don't wait for your product to be what you consider to be MVP and perfect to try to get traction. If you can get someone to say, if you build this, I will use it because it's that big of a pain point for me, that's going to get you significantly further from a fundraising perspective than look at my really cool, shiny, perfect product that I haven't bothered to take to market and see if someone will buy.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll talk about that a bit more later about testing markets and getting feedback. Rick, how about will you let me know what your thoughts are? Can this be done part-time? When you think about yourself as a founder or other startups that you've seen through mentoring or reviewing for SBIR, TEDCO?
In a word, no. So it is not just not a part-time job. It's probably 2 or 3 full-time jobs. So you have to be all the way in. Kristen said you have to have the mission, the passion to survive, to make it work. I'd say it goes even beyond that. You have to have an evangelical belief, because you have to convince many others to have the same evangelical belief and to work for no pay, for little pay in exchange, typically for equity. You've got to convince others in the clinical community that you can get traction. The same, you have to pull it off with angel funds, friends and family. Typically, in those early stages, you're running on a convertible note for financing and funding. So that's, a truly evangelical sale to convertible note holders. So I think not. I mean, I think you can get started. You can do some of the early boot up stuff part-time, but when it comes time to actually go and do it, you've got to have your environment, your personal finances, your family, your spouse. You got to have everything lined up to support this, long mission of many years.
Doug or Kristen, do you guys agree or disagree? I didn't want to lead the.
Yeah,
the
I would echo, Rick's thoughts. I completely agree. You got to have both feet 100% in, or you're probably not going to be nearly as successful as you probably could be. And one of the things that Rick had just mentioned at the end there, I was going to add on is that I think it's definitely possible to kind of start the idea, almost start the infrastructure of what you're trying to do before you take that step. I technically started Vita 8 months prior to joining full time. And it was a really good time for me, whereas I kind of got to sit there, build that business plan per se, right? Really what we wanted Vita Therapeutics to come into. It was great. I got to negotiate the license out of Hopkins during that time too. But once I joined full time, I felt like what I had done in those 8 months, I could have done in a month. And I think, you kind of have to have that, no looking back mentality to really be true to yourself, to kind of, start a company and then grow a company.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to clarify just a little bit, because I think and I think you said it really well, when you make the decision that you're far enough along and this is going to be the leap that you take, then you are all in, 2 hands, 2 feet, full body. Leading up to that, though, I do think that you can work and come up with the problem, the solution, the pitch deck, the early parts of the product where you are still working on a salary and saving up, for the time frame by which you think, you'll need to take that leap. I think you can do that. And even when you jump in, you hear a lot of startup founders say things like, this is 2, 3, 4 full-time jobs. Don't mistake that for, I need to work 24/7, 365, because you will burn yourself out. You will burn your team out. You won't really be able to keep good folks. What it means is that you're all in at the time that you need to be in. We really work, especially because we're in healthcare, and we think it's kind of hypocritical to build solutions for people to balance, their work and their life and their health and, prioritize themselves. And at the same time, be working around the clock. And quite frankly, it's a really hard thing to build a culture where you prioritize people first. But prioritizing people first absolutely wins 100% of the time. And so, you need to do what it takes. You need to be available to be on the road, being in front of your investors, in front of your customers. You need to be willing to, kind of move on a dime. And I think it's the commitment level, but I don't think that it's necessarily, 24/7, 365. I think if you surround yourself with a really good team, and earlier on, you are trading a lot of cash and equity, you're trading equity really for people working for lower cash levels, which means you really need to make sure you're bringing the right folks on the bus. And also making sure that if you bring somebody on and it's not the right person on the bus, that you get them off the bus really fast, because you really don't have a lot of time and capital, to waste in doing that. And building a winning team is really important. So I would say early days before you've decided to make the leap, yes, I think you can absolutely work and do it part-time. But once you've made the decision to go, then you are all in. And I will say that I think a character trait that's been studied a number of times by investors, and I saw an article about this actually just recently, is that the number one thing they can say about the teams that really perform is that when they look at a founding team, commonly, all of them believe that they can't fail. So, you have to be willing to and accept that you can and will fail, but then you need to operate every single day as though it's an impossibility. And I think that, again, it's just, it really does require a mental toughness in order to succeed in the startup space.
Nice. Thank you, guys. If you could write a job description for yourself, right? What is a startup CEO?
Who wants to start?
Say, I'm happy to start. It always shocks me how often I'll get asked that question from just like anyone in my life, just friends, family, and all of the above. And I kind of always classify it in a really short and sweet way. You are essentially a problem solver. That is what your role is, especially as like a startup CEO. You got to develop your plan, develop what you're trying to work towards, and then it's just a constant life of solving problems. There's always things that come up, even now, 2.5 years in, things that I never thought like I would have to kind of think through like for a solution for when I started. And sometimes it just cracked me up, and I'm just like, all right, well, it's my job. I got to go out. I got to solve that problem. So I think it's the best way to kind of summarize it is you are a problem solver.
Yeah, I would definitely add to that. I think, one is, I think you are equivalently a mentor, a counselor, you are the chief salesperson, and you are the wearer of all hats. And, you know, so sometimes I tell our leadership team, like, you're in the business of managing failure. Your job is to go find all of the things that could go wrong and to be paranoid. Paranoia is actually a really good thing in a startup organization. Find the things that you think, you know, could hit you. And by the way, you can't even predict some of the things that will hit you. And so when that comes across, it's like, yeah, you do have to problem solve, but you have to problem solve very quickly. And you have to be able to prioritize between the things like, where can I kind of put the hole in the, put the finger in the hole in the dam, versus I need to keep focused on this other strategic priority, but I have to make sure I circle back around before that little plug in the dam becomes a crack and then becomes something that tumbles down. Because the thing that I tell people, you will never have enough money and enough team to do everything you want to do at the time frame that you want to do it in. It's just not possible. So having the skill set to prioritize and to make really tough decisions is critical to a successful CEO position.
What about you, Rick?
Yeah, I think the job description would read financial professional, accountant, lawyer, salesperson, clinical trial designer, clinical trial executor, grant writer. It's jack of all trades, and unfortunately you need to master all those trades too. So it's more hats than you could ever imagine wearing. And kind of as I led off, if that's really fun, if that's a gas, then it's a great thing to do. If it's not, then it becomes quickly overwhelming, and you kind of tap out. But you're doing every profession. You know, I'm the last 48 hours, we've been launching a Series A round, and I've been a lawyer for 48 hours, and I did not go to law school.
So Rick, I wonder, in your capacity as a CEO, you obviously know your own experiences and your own strengths and weaknesses, but when you put on sort of your mentor hat, is there any type of prototypical CEO, or you know, is it more technical, more business? Have you seen both work?
Yeah, both work. It's more about the bandwidth of the individual. So, you know, my background is excuse me, environmental engineering, and I was a really bad engineer. So I went back to business school and you know, got the business side of it. But you know, there's long lists of CEOs that started very technical. You know, Hewlett Packard would be two very, very technical people that built a pretty decent business. And then there's very non-technical people. This guy named Gates and Jobs were pretty non-technical people that build fairly substantial businesses. So I don't think the starting point or the background or the education is really the issue. It's more the internal drive and desire to expand your bandwidth. So when I'm faced with a problem of you know, probably my weak spot is finance, and so what do is I reach out to a couple trusted financial advisors, and I just start teaching myself what I need to learn to master that piece. So I think you just have to be willing to grab the reins, learn it, and then put it into practice, and accept the fact you're going to make mistakes and just correct them quickly.
One of the questions that was posed before we even started was, you know, where do startup CEOs come from? Right? Like, if you are not the founder or inventor, like, how did you get attracted to the technology that you're working with? And if you think about, you know, I know, Rick, you mentioned working with Hopkins Inventors, and Doug has. How do inventors who may not want to leave their day job find somebody to run the business?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult, and it's more difficult in this area, in the Mid-Atlantic area, then again, my perspective is purely life science. So if you're talking about a cybersecurity startup or something different, it's going to be very geography dependent. But in the medical device area, that's not such a tall ask in Boston or North Carolina or Minneapolis. But around here, it's difficult. And there's really no magic answer to that other than just network galore. You just have to, get on the phone and just start calling everybody you can imagine. And, everybody sees how LinkedIn works. One contact can lead to 50 contacts. And you just have to take advantage of that to start beating the street, basically, to find that individual. I'm working with a Hopkins startup right now as a mentor to help them find a CEO. And it's been a huge struggle. And we're expanding the search through Mass Medic up into the Boston area, because that's how far we have to reach to find the talent, if you will, that can grab a medical device at a real early stage, get it funded, and get it on its feet.
Doug, did you find the technology in the inventors, or did they find you?
So in my case, I found them, but I probably had a little bit more of a unique experience. So as I said, I sat on the other side of the table, and one of the ways that I kind of had my investment philosophy is I would go out and I would talk to the experts. Every time I wanted to learn about a technology that we were potentially looking at investing in, I'd try to cold email someone, ask them to get lunch or a drink just to learn from them. So I had started building some really great relationships with folks predominantly at Hopkins. It's how I met my co-founder, Peter. And through him, I kind of was able to network through a bunch of different researchers. And that kind of led the first launch of the first therapeutic that we were driving at Vita and really used to start the company. That was with Dr. Catherine Wagner and Dr. Gabson Lee. And then as I kind of kept a lot of those relationships going, it turned into, further developments from Dr. Alan Friedman's lab. And now we actually have some stuff that we also kind of identified ourselves out of Stanford. So, for me personally, I kind of was the more proactive one, trying to go out and build those relationships. It's funny, the question of how do you find that CEO? I don't think I have a good answer for it. Right now, I'm looking for somebody like that because I'm attached to this other technology and we're trying to build a company around it. And I think, what Rick said, the networking piece, I think it's huge. I've met a lot of folks just from getting out there, talking to, other CEOs, other people who are doing similar things in that. And it's led to a lot of really great relationships that are actually helping me form this other venture at the moment. But I don't know if there's like an easy way to go out and find that CEO, or if there's a perfect formula for it.
I mean, from my perspective, so I sit on, I'm a board director on a couple of younger companies, and both of those, well, two of the companies in the last year, we've replaced the CEO. And, some of them were very, very early stage, pre-series A, seed type, and it's because the founder who's involved in the company is clinical and doesn't want to be the CEO and do all of the financial and the sales and all of those great things. And the reality is that, now I think is actually a good time to be looking for senior level executives, because there's so much consolidation happening in healthcare and it feels like everyone is rotating seats. So, from networking, but go out and figure out, who has a passion around the thing that you're trying to do, who's published on it, who's written articles, who's been a keynote speaker or has been on panels for the topic that you're talking about. Figure out what roles they're in. You could also find somebody who maybe is not a CEO, but maybe has been a COO or has been an EVP who's gone through a company that went from being very young all the way through either IPO or a successful growth phase. Series D and others. Once people do that, there are certain personality types that just want to go back and do it again, because every founder will tell you that no matter how many years in, and I think it's actually already been mentioned on this call once, looking backwards, you always know that you could have done it better, smarter, and faster, with faster kind of being the key. If you just had known then what you know now, And it's why I like to say, investors invest in serial entrepreneurs for that exact reason, because they can typically navigate the waters very quickly, and they know the playbooks and they know what they need to know, but they also know their weaknesses and who to surround themselves with on a team. So I would definitely say it's the recommendation would be find people who are in the space, who are passionate about it, network to them, have conversations with them, make sure that you can, see their passion, and then see if they have the right type of spirit to be that next person that brings, this business forward, with the founder still being involved and or only being partially involved. And you could take a board role, you could take an advisory role, but you wouldn't want to keep your day job and only be partially in, because that's not fair to the company or the team that's being built if you're one of the early, kind of contributing founders.
One of the other topics that we had to advertise for today was, discovery to market, or mapping the markets and getting feedback. Kristen mentioned this earlier, how we talk a lot about how startups often fail because they built something that nobody wants to pay for, rather than because the technology doesn't work. So maybe Kristen, if you want to start first, like, how did you test the waters early on to get that market feedback and validate that this was something you could build a business around?
Yeah, our journey was hard. I am not going to lie. And I think it's because, we kind of subscribe to that, if you ask the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, Henry Ford type thing. When you're doing something that truly is not just a better mousetrap, but it's literally not even a trap at all, then it's almost like you have to spend a lot of time educating the market. And if you believe that you are, kind of what's called a category creator, and you don't fit neatly into a box of a problem where there's already a budget, then you need to raise a lot more capital than you think you do, because it's not about hitting milestones in your product. It's about how long it's going to take to educate the market and make sure that you have those, buyers. For some of the other companies that I work with, it's a little bit different, right? It's more around, hey, here's the problem that we're solving. Here's the solution. Here's how, easy and fast I can make it for you. And then it's really kind of hacking the sales cycle timeline to see if you can get in very quickly to get early results. Because once you have proof points and results, then it's much easier to take to scale, because you have real world examples. One of our early investors had said, I really do wish I had gotten in earlier with b.well, but 5 years ago, when you were talking about, the patient right of access and interoperability and fire servers, and, APIs from a healthcare perspective, all being directed by patients, people would have thought you were crazy. But those things were not, we had to change the federal law, for our company to work. And we had to see that through, along with all the technical implementations. So I think it's more about find people earlier who say, yes, that's exactly where, we think healthcare needs to go, or yes, this is a really big problem because, and just get those early adopters early on, get the data, get the proof points, and make sure that you are then using that data to go out and sell to build traction moving forward. But recognize up front whether or not you are selling into a problem space where there's already a budget or you are selling into a space with a problem that people haven't recognized yet. And there is no budget, because the difference in the sales cycle timeline isn't whether or not someone agrees there's a problem. It's whether or not that it's such a pain point that there's already a cost center for it, and there's a decision maker who can spend that capital.
Kristen, was b.well able to do any sort of beta launch or minimum viable product for feedback, or did it have to be pretty fully baked at launch?
We did. No, we definitely did. We started very early on the platform with helping, but we were selling into a bit of a different market. So as an example, like employers offer health and wellness solutions. And while that was not our mission and goal, it was not as difficult for us to go into and sell against health and wellness solutions that really weren't returning an ROI, when the base product of what we were looking to build long-term was already delivering more transparency and more of an ROI based on the way we built it. So we could get started, but it wasn't going to be the thing that made up enough revenue for us to have really good margins. So I could sell one, health system or one payer versus 50 mid to small size employers, and the revenue, would be very different. So when you're looking at your financials, and I think it's been said really clearly, you also need to keep an eye on cash and money and, margin, so that you can tell your story from a fundraise perspective. You have to find a way to get in the door and show traction. And I will say that, for us, we have small revenue drivers and large revenue drivers. but both are really important because logos show momentum, and obviously ARR drives, value for the company, and you need to stay focused on both.
I'm wondering if Rick and Doug can weigh in on, with a medical device or a new therapeutic, there's not really a minimum viable product, right? There's not a beta, you know what I mean, right? This, you can't test it out, see how it works on a person. How do you get market feedback or sort of customer feedback when you're devising a solution, maybe in Doug's case, where it's a rare disease? The patient's certainly going to want to have that cure. Like how do you define that feedback or customer discovery?
So, I think I don't know if there's direct parallels in devices. So Rick, you can, say if you agree or not afterwards. But for me, the way I look at it from a therapeutic standpoint is it's really easy to actually go out and map out that competitive landscape, kind of understand what other folks are working on from like a therapeutic perspective. And what you just need to do is you need to figure out why your technology is different and really why it makes sense to bring that type of technology forward from a therapeutic. And I look at it as that it's not so much the patients that are our customers here. Of course, if what we're doing works, they're going to 100% want access to it. We're going after rare orphan disease patients. It's the investors, for me, that are actually my customers. So I look at it and say, where did I get the most feedback? It was really early on when I just launched the fundraising, and I was out there talking to really good, sophisticated biotech companies, and I was learning from them their thoughts. And I'll share that it was a lot of times it was the few people who truly give you like constructive criticism that I think allowed Vita at the end to go out and be successful. We launched Vita with this neuromuscular platform, and there was really two ways that you could have brought a technology like that to market, and we were focused on just one of them. And I would meet people, and some people were like, well, you should focus on the other. Other people agreed that I should be focusing there. And then a few months into the raise, I had one guy say to me, he said, why don't you focus on both? And it was kind of this like almost obvious like thing that he said that kind of just sparked the light bulb moment in me. And I did that. And then after that, people were like flocking to come over and like be a part of it and give fun. So like, it was getting out there and kind of testing the idea, testing the technology that we're working on, and then hearing the feedback, and then just kind of honing in on some of the advice that we were collective hearing to kind of go out and build the path forward of how we wanted to, drive the company.
Rick, what's your take on this? And maybe in particular, as you're planning an A round, like, do you see the same investor feedback as a way of testing sort of your hypothesis? Or
I think medical device actually lends itself very, very well to feedback and kind of the trial and error approach. In our case, the device was built to solve a very specific problem. So it wasn't technology invented that's out hunting for a problem. It was literally conceptualized around the problem that I described earlier, and then built to fix that. But then you still have to validate it. And I think the medical device field is very well suited to build a very rough prototype. You hear a lot about company builds a looks like prototype, totally non-functioning. And then you can take that out to the potential customer base and say, well, this is what it's going to look like, and these are the functionality that we're proposing in it, and get that feedback. Pretty much an I-Core-like program, a program I wholeheartedly endorse. And the way we did it is we then built a functioning, kind of ugly but phase one prototype, and took it out to the market, to emergency room physicians, PACU physicians, general care floor physicians, nurses, technologists, and showed them what we have. And of course, they tore it apart, buying in completely to the concept of respiratory monitoring for patients that are not being monitored today. That's a pretty easy sale. Within that, there's a million details of how you pull it off, at what price point, how user-friendly it is, how easy to set up, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all the rich feedback we got. And we then built up a phase two prototype. We went to Cleveland Clinic, and we got collected some data there. We then went to Brigham and Women's Hospital, collected some data there. Again, more feedback, all under IRB protocols. So the device is changing and maturing all along that path until you get to the piece that you're going to put in front of the FDA and try to get clearance. So I think device is very, very well suited for kind of that iterative feedback approach.
I appreciate you plugging iCore. I didn't ask you to do that, but we do at Hopkins at least 4 times per year. We'll take teams through the iCore customer discovery value proposition model with some mentors. So anybody who's attending this webinar or watching it later and interested in that, please do reach out. We've got one starting in about 4 weeks. We also believe very strongly in that process. It's important to know early on, get outside your bubble, get outside your comfort zone, and figure out if you've got an idea and a solution that you can truly build a business around.
Absolutely.
Kristen, you said something earlier that was great. It's actually a question Dan Roach had suggested I ask. What do you wish you knew? What do you know now that you wish you knew when you started the company?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a great question. And I'll say there's so many things. One is, kind of right out of the gate, I think the thing that gave me most anxiety with selecting who, my investors were and how to move forward was I wish I knew and understood more about cap tables. I wish I understood a little bit more about, kind of term sheets. Obviously, these are things that you learn along the way, especially as a first-time founder. But I feel like I wish I knew that I shouldn't spend so much time with people trying to teach me how to pitch. We wasted a lot of time on the wrong, kind of programs to move us forward. And I think that I always encourage startups now to find the company that went right before you, who can help you fast track things. And the reason that I advise companies and, kind of pay it forward and give back is because I don't think every CEO out there should have to solve for every single problem. Meaning everyone doesn't need to pay a lawyer to write an NDA. There's lots of, NDAs. The National Venture Capital Association has form documents that if you kind of comply to them, it makes, the negotiation of a term sheet and the actual deal documents get done much faster. I didn't even know that was a thing until my Series B. And so, I think that there's just a lot of knowledge out there. I think it's important to, understand who and how you can go to build a network that can support you with the ability to save capital on things like space, and to get discounts on things that you're using. If you're hosting on AWS, there's a million programs you can join for free that are going to give you discounts on that you didn't know. So there's just a lot of things that I think are out there. And if you don't know the questions to ask or where to go look, I think it's really difficult. And so I do encourage people that if there are networks of, entrepreneurs and organizations that don't necessarily, take equity from you very early, to be part of them, you can learn a lot very quickly around questions you should be asking, even if you hadn't asked them. But I would also say that staying laser focused on getting a product to market with traction and getting key results is the number one thing. Don't make your product perfect before you get it launched. Get it launched, get the data, revise it, because you're going to revise it anyway. So just get it out there and find those willing participants. I think we waited way too long to sell into the market because we thought we had to have a fully working, kind of functioning product first. And that was even for what we considered MVP. So our MVP, we waited for it to get done before we started having the conversations to sell. I think you can sell while having the MVP being built at the same time, and you will save yourself a lot of time.
And Rick, since you said this is your third go round, what have you done differently that you now do know that you didn't know the first time around?
Yeah, I think it's understanding the time sinks that are out there. There's lots of them, but one of the big ones is there's a lot of I'm trying to find the most polite word for this, a lot of imposter investors. So there's a lot of time that can be spent. If somebody offered to me, hey, I'd like to pitch my company to you, it's a new technology, I'd in all likelihood say yes, because I'm curious and I want to learn pretty much anything about anything that I can. And there's a lot of kind of investors in quotes that spend a whole lot of time doing that and very little, if not zero time actually investing. So I think as a startup, in that early money hunt, you just need to be cautious and spend your time where the investors are real, and you can ferret that out by simply looking at their history, their portfolio, their investment thesis. And if that's not, loud and just screaming off the page at you, then believe what you see, believe what you hear, and move on and spend your time with people that are serious and are really investing, because you can spend many moons doing nothing.
Doug, how about you? What were some aha things that you wish you'd known going into it?
Yeah, there's plenty. But I'll add quickly to Rick's thoughts there. I think the best way to kind of summarize that too is you have a lot of follow-on investors and you have a lot of like lead investors. And especially when you're starting that company, and in Rick's case, launching that A round, you really want to try to target those lead type investors, because there will be plenty of folks that you meet with that are, they're just waiting to follow on somebody who, they think is a great investor, and they're willing to do like more of the work because they're taking that lead standpoint. So I think it is important to kind of target and try to find those folks who are willing and able to take that initiative themselves on the investment front when you're out there. But maybe one quick lesson that I would throw out, and there's so many different ways that I could take this right now, but I think this would be helpful for anyone who's going to be a first-time entrepreneur or considering being that first-time entrepreneur, is don't be afraid to hire very capable senior management folks very, very early on in the gate. You don't have to prove yourself that you can do every single type of role, right from the very start. I wish I had hired some of the key people that we have now 6 months prior to hiring them, because at the end of the day, they've just helped so much more and taken us to places that not a single person is capable of, right? It really takes a village, right, to kind of go out there and build that company. So don't be afraid to go out and hire those people right away, right from the start.
Thank you. And I see Kristen answered one of the questions in the Q&A, and we only have a few minutes left. So, one of the questions in the chat is fairly technical, probably very much for Doug, for cell manufacturing or launching a drug company. We also have one about FDA and clinical trials. These are very sticky, big issues and probably not the main topic of today, but maybe if you guys could speak broadly about networks or resources or mentors that have been particularly helpful to you. I mean, don't say Rick Hughen just because he's here, but who's been helpful in that capacity for you?
I'm happy to start. I consider myself lucky because I have a lot of different mentors in my life, and a lot of really great people who have like just helped me get to where I am. But one that kind of stands out above and beyond is a guy who I asked to join the board of Vita really early on. His name is Valdes. He's the CEO of a company called Biohaven Pharmaceuticals. It's now a $9 billion publicly traded biotech company. But this guy started it out of Yale himself, seed stage, went through every single phase that a biotech CEO has to go through, took the company public, got an FDA approval, and now is doing something that everyone kind of always forgets about, but he's actually out competing 7 pharma companies while out there selling that drug that he got approved. So this guy has just been in so many ways just the best mentor that I could have ever asked for. He's a phenomenal leader. Every time I'm stuck on something or just maybe even just feeling a little beat up, a quick phone call to him, he always helps like kind of start that fire and set me on the right path. And I think it's really important to find those people that you can lean on over time when you have those tougher moments to be part of it. So Vlad's like somebody instantly that comes to mind for me.
Yeah,
Kristen, how about you? And maybe even speak about like accelerators or something like M1 Ventures that you went through.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually just looking at my Slack, common way that we communicate, but I probably have 25 different networks that I'm a part of on Slack, not just my own company. And that's because of the accelerators that can support you, initiatives like in Baltimore, I'm part of the Upsurge initiative, Baltimore Tracks initiative, and you meet really good people that are networked. And I find that it's not so much just a mentor. I think mentors are really important because I think it's important that you surround yourself with talent and experience that you do not have. And again, finding that person who went right before you. But I think it's equivalently is as important to find other startups that are kind of in the same phase as you and communicate with those CEOs, because it's not uncommon for me once, twice, 3 times a week to be like, hey, how'd you guys handle this? Right. When it came to me. And it could be something as simple as, how did you guys figure out when you created a bonus structure, for your team, or an equity program for the entire organization? From a bonus perspective, how did you structure that? There's no guidebook on there on the best practice on how to do that. And so asking a lot of peers around how they handled it can help inform your thought and what applies to your business. But having those people on standby, because people don't mind very quickly saying, hey, I'm interviewing, a chief commercial officer, and I know you've got experience there. Do you mind talking to this person just to give me a gut sense? And getting people to help you along the way, I think is important. And a lot of people will volunteer parts of their time to kind of help, all ships rise with the tide. I do that with a number of companies. I know a lot of other CEO founders do the same thing. So I would say surround yourself with that network and make sure that you have access or just a repeated, kind of meeting to talk things through, where you're stepping out of the day-to-day and you're thinking about, like, what should I really be focused on? And what are some of the things that might come at me that I have no experience with? And how do I find people who can give me expertise in that area?
And Rick, I don't know if you can speak to your sort of dual role as a person who's gotten advice and given advice. Any tips for others?
Sure. I lean on people from my previous startup network and experience. I mentioned earlier, my weak spot is finance. So my previous CFO at CSA Medical, Steve Schaefer, he's a financial savant and has raised $200 million over numerous companies. So I'm calling up Steve on a probably a weekly or every other week basis, asking for advice, because I know those are many blind spots for me, and he's wildly helpful. A previous VP of R&D and quality is another person, a good friend from a previous company. We needed a statistics person for some power calculations for an SBIR study that we were submitting, a fast track. And one phone call, and he pointed me to this, mathematical genius, Joe Mazzaro, who is the lead statistician for the Framingham Heart Study, biggest clinical trial ever done. Would have never found that individual, and one phone call away, and I've got a statistics, genius to help us put that piece together for that submission. So it's just really relying on that network and realizing just how many holes you have in your own personal knowledge, which for me is vast. And you just need lots of support. And I'm not shy about knocking on doors and picking up the phone.
All right. Well, I see we're at the top of the hour. I will say quickly that those of you at Hopkins, we do have a mentor network at Fast Forward. So don't hesitate to reach out. If you're student entrepreneurs, there's a whole host of them as well at Fast Forward U. Others in Maryland, Maryland Tech Council has a mentor network, Maryland Business Innovation Association likewise. So there's a lot of local resources for those of you here. I really want to thank Rick, Doug, and Kristen for their time today and their candor and sharing of their stories. It's, I think, hopefully really helpful. I know there's been some very good feedback already just in the chat. And make one plug for the next panel, which will be April 19th. I'll email everyone who attended today. It's also on our events page at JHTV, but you could hear from Dan Roach, who envisioned this whole series. He's a founder at Qualitics and one of our mentors, as well as Jesse Christopher from Longevity Neurosolutions and Ellington West of Sonavi Labs. So thanks, everyone. I won't take more of your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.